The monastery of Saint Mary of the Victory is located in the village of Batalha, in the district of Leiria. It's better known as Batalha Monastery. It's classified as a national monument since 1910 and as a national pantheon since 2016. It was included by UNESCO in the World Heritage Sites list in 1983. The construction of this monastery, that is one of the most notable works of architecture ever built in Portugal, is intimately linked to the events that followed the death of King Ferdinand I of Portugal in October 1383. Having left no male sons, his only descendant was the Princess Beatrice, who had married in May 1383, and when she was only 10 years old, the King John I of Castile. After the death of Ferdinand I, his wife Leonortels acclaimed her daughter Beatrice as Queen of Portugal in several cities and villages throughout the country. Meanwhile, John I proclaimed himself King of Castile and Leon and Portugal, combining the flags of both countries into just one. The succession crisis of 1383-1385 thus began. On the Portuguese side, the Master of Effigies, who would later be acclaimed as King John I of Portugal, leads the revolt against Leonortels and the King of Castile. The pivotal moment in this dispute takes place on August 14, 1385, in the fields of Aljubarrota, where the Portuguese army inflicts a heavy defeat on the larger and better equipped Castilian forces. Tradition indicated that on the day of the battle, eve of the feast of the Assumption of Mary, August 15, John I of Portugal invoked the protection of Christ's mother, promising her the construction and dedication of a monastery in case of victory. The construction of the monastery of Saint Mary of the Victory didn't occur on the battlefield, but on a location a bit further to the north that had better topographical conditions and access to water. But the meaning of this ambitious undertaking went far beyond religion. It constituted a consecration of John I as King of Portugal, associating him with a legitimization through divine power. It also marked the beginning of a new house, that of Effigies, that succeeded the House of Burgundy in the throne, standing as a visible landmark and symbol of the new king's power. The construction began 1 or 2 years after the Battle of Aljubarrota, being certainly underway in 1387, according to the available documents. On the southern facade of the monastery we can see the lateral portal, formed by 4 ogival archivolts, the outer 2 decorated with small arches and the innermost one with a denticulated pattern. This geometrical decoration stands in contrast with the naturalism of the capitals, with well-defined foliage arranged in 2 levels, complemented by the stems and fig leaves that adorn the space between the columns. Above the portal stands a triangular gable, flanked by 2 tall buttresses that end in pinnacles, framing the Portuguese coat of arms, and inside 2 squares below, the family crests of John I and Philippa of Lancaster. All these 3 carefully carved elements are topped by baldachins. The church's facade faces east, being divided into 3 uneven sections, with the middle one corresponding to the central nave being taller and wider. These 3 volumes are demarcated by buttresses topped by pyramidal pinnacles adorned with crockets. In the middle, over the portal, stands a large ogee arch window. The main portal has impressive dimensions, being as wide as the church's central nave. It comprises a total of 6 ogival archivolts. The 2 outer archivolts depict characters from the New Testament. The 2 middle ones portray figures from the Old Testament, such as the kings of Judah and sisters of Mary. The two inner archivolts consist of winged figures, angels and seraphim that precede the approach to the tympanum. Above the door, the tympanum is decorated with a depiction of God in the guise of an elder raising his right hand and with his left hand standing over the sphere of the world. Surrounding him are the four evangelists. On each side of the portal stand statues of the apostles, 6 on each side, standing over bases supported by ornated corbels. Over their heads there are finely carved baldachins. All this sculptural ensemble is topped on the portal's head by a bas-relief of the coronation of the Virgin. The arch's tip is flanked by the family crests of João I and Philippa of Lancaster. The interior of the Batalha Monastery's church impresses due to its verticality, which is no wonder for it has the tallest nave in Portugal, with a height of 107 feet. It spans over 260 feet in length by 72 feet in width. The central nave has 2 levels, marked by the tall arcades and by a clerestory formed by broad windows. The whiteness of the limestone is flooded by the light colored by the stained glass windows, which, though not being mostly the original ones, preserve the multicolored effect that was intended by the builders. This church's design follows by and large the vision of its first architect, the master builder Afonso V, who worked here until 1402, the year of his passing. During his 14 years in charge of the worksite, he witnessed the construction of most of the church, the sacristy and 2 wings of the cloister, having also begun the Chapterhouse. He was succeeded by Huguet, foreign master builder of obscure origins that already worked in the Batalha projects and who concluded the work started by Domingos. He eventually introduced different architectural solutions, expressed, for instance, in the Chapterhouse vault, which we'll see later on. He also planned the Founders' Chapel and the unfinished chapels, the latter during the reign of Edward, King of Portugal. The third master builder responsible for the Batalha worksite was Martim Vasques between 1438 and 1448, during the regency of Peter, Duke of Coimbra, brother of King Edward, concluding the construction of the monastic dependencies. The chancel impresses the visitor, having the same height as the central nave, accentuating its depth and contributing to the illumination of the church. On the chancel's vault, the family crests of João I and Philippa of Lancaster are painted, reinforcing the presence of the heraldry of the patrons and founders of this monastery. There are 4 chevet apse chapels, with the ones of the Gospel side consecrated to Our Lady of the Rosary and Saint Barbara. On the Epistle side, there's a chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Piety, and another one, where the Master of the Order of Christ, Lopo Dias de Sousa, is buried, that has an unknown invocation. The rib vaults on the central and lateral naves are ogival, presenting, in the middle, keystones with bosses decorated with phytomorphic motifs. The central nave's bosses are particularly impressive, both due to its size and the quality of its decoration. It is suggested that they result from a decision by Huguet during the conclusion of the ceiling. The lateral naves, with a lower height and width than the central nave, are also illuminated through large windows divided into 3 sections. The decoration of the columns and capitals inside the church is predominantly of a phytomorphic nature, except for a scene of the Annunciation and 15 musician angels in one of the central nave's columns. In the chapel of Our Lady of Piety we can find a polychrome wooden sculpture depicting the Dead Christ, made in the 18th century, as well as a Pietà from the mid-15th century in polychrome limestone. In the chapel of the Holy Sacrament we can see another polychrome limestone sculpture carved in the 15th century by the Batalha Monastery workshop, portraying Saint Barbara. Traversing the various spaces of the monastery of St. Mary of the Victory enables contact with architectural and artistic elements that exemplify various styles and influences. Here we can see the journey of Portuguese and European architecture from the Rayonnant Gothic to the Renaissance, passing through the flamboyant Gothic and Manueline styles. This latter national style, integrated in the so-called Late Gothic, had in Batalha its first manifestations through the hand of the architect Mateus Fernandes, namely in the Royal Cloister and in the unfinished chapels. The Batalha Monastery aroused international interest in the late 18th century, particularly after the publication of the architectural survey done by James Murphy. Thus, from 1840 onwards, restoration work started in this monument, led by Luís da Silva Mozinho de Albuquerque, who used Murphy's drawings as an inspiration. The romantic mindset of that era fostered an idealized perspective of the monument, resulting in the removal of various religious symbols and in the demolition of some monastic facilities, such as a cloister from the time of King John III. That reconstruction of the past continued in the 1930s and 40s during the interventions led by the National Monuments General Administration that promoted the removal of non-original elements. During that period, the altarpiece of Jesus, a Mannerist-style work from the transition between the 16th and 17th centuries, was taken from the northern arm of the transept to the Church of Our Lady of the Conception in Lisbon. The Baroque-style retable of the Chapel of St. Michael, commissioned between 1691 and 1692, made a shorter journey, having been transferred to the Parish Church of Batalha. Across to the southern wall of the Batalha Monastery church stands the Founder's Chapel, presenting a square floor plan and spreading across 3 bays. Its construction wasn't a part of the monastery's original plan, constituting a later decision by King John I that was recorded in his testament. His intention was to be entombed next to the Queen, who had already died in 1426 when he wrote his will, in the church's chancel or in the other we now ordered to be built, referring to the Founder's Chapel, that was finished in 1434, a year after John I died. This space was designed and planned by master builder Huguet. Its square floor plan develops at the center into an octagon covered by a stellar vault with a prominent royal crest in its keystone. The ground level is defined by 8 bundled columns, with pointed arches adorned with fringes that still preserve part of the original paint that covered them. In the middle stands the large tomb of King John I and Queen Philippa of Lancaster, over whose lid both their recumbent effigies are sculpted, with crowned heads resting on pillows. It stands over 8 lions, being decorated on the larger sides with long laudatory inscriptions, and on the lid's edge with the mottos Pur bem from John I and I me plaît from the Queen. The statues on top of the tomb are depicted side by side, holding their right hands together, affirming their union. The king is wearing full armor and the queen is wearing a large cloak with the Portuguese royal symbols. On their left hands, the king holds a ceremonial baton and the queen holds a closed book of hours. Their feet rest over foliage and their heads are protected by lavish baldachins decorated on their back with the royal crests. On the southern wall of the Founders' Chapel stand 4 arcosolia that house the tombs of 4 infants, sons of the royal couple that founded this monastery. On the side, they feature their crests and, in some of them, the symbol of the English Order of the Garter. The first tomb from the left belongs to Ferdinand, the Holy Prince, who died in captivity in Fez, Morocco, and was transferred here in 1471. It features his motto, Le bien me plaît. The following tomb belongs to the infant John, Master of the Order of Santiago and Constable of Portugal, and his wife Isabel of Barcelos, with the motto J'ai bien raison. Over the tomb it has a bas-relief depicting the road to Calvary. Next comes the tomb of Prince Henry the Navigator, Master of the Order of Christ and initiator of the Age of Discovery, with his motto Talent de bien faire. It is the only one that has a recumbent effigy on its top, following the model of his father's tomb. Finally, there's the tomb of Peter, Duke of Coimbra and Prince Regent during the minority of King Afonso V, and his wife Isabella of Urgel. During the restorations campaign that took place in the 19th century, all the altars that existed in this chapel were removed, including the altar of João I that was placed at his tomb's feet. On the western wall, where the liturgical implements and vestments were once kept, a set of 3 tombs were added between the 19th and 20th century, emulating the original ones from the 15th century. The remains of King Afonso V, John II, and his son, the Prince Afonso, were then moved into these tombs. The Founders' Chapel is illuminated through large windows that still preserve some precious fragments of the original stained glass. Attached to the northern side of the church stands the Royal Cloister of the Monastery of St. Mary of the Victory. In its southern wall, we can see the remains of a fresco mural painting from the 16th century depicting the Calvary. This cloister is the largest in the complex, delineating a square with 164 feet long sides and being vaulted in all its extension, confirming an intention of magnificence on the part of King John I. Its architecture and decoration reveal the 2 personalities that were behind its construction, the architects Afonso Domingos on a first stage and Huguet at the project's conclusion. The gallery on the southern side, adores to the church, as well as the one on the eastern side that gives access to the Chapterhouse, were built by Afonso Domingos, accompanying the church's building process. The northern gallery, where the original dormitory stood, and the eastern one that leads into the refectory, feature elements that identify them as being Huguet's work. Though this cloister belongs to a monastery that housed a mendicant order, the Dominicans, its decorative pomp and splendor is closer to what we can find in the 14th century cathedrals. Examples of that are the cloisters of the Porto and Évora cathedrals, with the latter having possibly served as an inspiration. This cloister, as the ones on those cathedrals, is also covered by a terrace. The decoration of the columns' capitals and of the vaults' bosses is almost exclusively of a phytomorphic character, with the exception of a capital in the southern gallery that depicts two pairs of Dominican friars. Those figures hold two open books, signaling the association of this cloister wing that was known as the Reading Gallery with the study of the sacred books. Halfway through the eastern gallery of the cloister, the entrance to the Chapterhouse is opened. A broad square space, with sides measuring 62 feet, was used for the daily reunions of the friars. The importance of this room is expressed by the care that its construction presents, from the portal with 5 archivolts to the ambitious single rib vault that covers it. In the early 16th century, during the reign of Manuel I, several interventions were conducted here, such as the construction of this portal of the so-called Old Chapter. On that same era, the arcades of the Royal Cloister were filled with magnificent screens supported by delicate colonnettes. These delicately carved gratings are formed by trunks and waving festoons, framing pomegranates and crosses of Christ in its crossings. In each central arch appears the armillary sphere. On the western side of this cloister stood the refectory that was preceded by the Lavabo, integrated into a small square gallery with a fountain in the middle. Built during the Manueline campaign of construction, 16th century, this space, located at the angle between the northern and western galleries, has an almost flat, ribbed vault. The drinking water that fed this fountain came from a spring in the place of Jordoeira, located about half a mile away from the monastery, being conveyed here through underground limestone ducts. The meaning of this lavabo is simultaneously practical and symbolic, for the washing of the hands before entering the refectory appealed to a physical but also spiritual cleansing. On the western wall of the cloister, another small gem, a fresco mural painting from the first quarter of the 16th century, portraying Saint Paul. Adjacent to the northern side of the Royal Cloister, there's a second cloister of slightly smaller dimensions, measuring 144 feet on each side, and also with a square floor plan. Its construction is attributed to Fernão de Évora, who was the architect responsible for the Batalha Monastery work site between 1448 and 1477. It resulted from the Dominican friars' need to have a set of facilities, such as individual cells, study rooms, and a library, that weren't implemented in the original plan. The ground floor has simple ogival rib vaults supported by prismatic corbels. The various compartments were distributed along the galleries. This cloister was built under the aegis of King Afonso V, whose insignia appears in the bosses of the vaults on the ground floor. For that reason, this became known as the Cloister of King Afonso. The upper level consists of a wide balcony that covers all of the cloister sides, and along which the individual cells of the Dominican friars are distributed. The wooden ceiling is supported by 8-sided columns that hold the architraves on which the supporting beams rest. The complex stands out for its sobriety and simplicity. On the northern gallery of this upper floor of the cloister of King Afonso, we can find the mechanism of a tower clock dating back to the second half of the 15th century. This mechanism was once installed in the tallest tower of the monastery and marked the passing of the hours through the ringing of a bell. It's not known if it ever had a clock display. To the east of the church's chancel, in complete alignment with it, stands the royal pantheon of King Edward, better known as Unfinished Chapels. This space is structured according to an octagonal floor plan, with the entrance on its axis and 7 radiant chapels, separated by small triangular frames. The construction of this pantheon began around 1434 by initiative of King Edward during the first year of his reign. He chose not to be entombed in the Founder's Chapel as his father had intended. The project and execution of this work was led by Huguet, whose technical and artistic skills, honed after many years directing the Batalha worksite, are well manifested here. Edward died in 1437 after just 5 years as a king. The architect Huguet died soon after in 1438, hindering the conclusion of this pantheon and leaving no record of what type of vault had been planned for it. In the beginning of the 16th century, King Manuel I showed the will to conclude these unfinished chapels, implying his intention of being buried here. This new constructive phase was headed by the master builder Mateus Fernandes, who enriched this space with one of the most brilliant and stunning chapters of Manueline art. However, the work was once again incomplete, with King Manuel I choosing to be interred in the Jerónimos monastery, whose construction he had sponsored. Following the model of joint entombment inaugurated in Portugal by his father João I, the tomb of Edward and Eleanor of Aragon depicts the recumbent effigies of the royal couple in its lid, holding hands. This tomb was originally placed at the entrance of the chancel in the Batalha Monastery's church, only being transferred to this location in 1940. In the chapel to the left, that was originally reserved for the King Afonso V, stands the tomb of his child, the Prince John, who died in 1451, just a few days after he was born. All the tombs that currently rest in this pantheon were placed here after 1940. The criterion applied to the other translations is now unknown. The identification of the tombs is therefore problematic, though we know that one of those belonged to members of the family of the Counts of Miranda. In his testament, wrote in 1517, King Manuel I expressed his will that the pantheon should be concluded to receive the tombs of Edward, Afonso V, and John II as originally planned. John III, his son, tried to fulfill that wish, as confirmed by the Renaissance-style balcony that was built above the entrance portal in 1533, designed by the architect João de Castilho. Eventually, he abandoned that endeavor, leaving these chapels definitively unfinished and therefore imperfect. The entrance into the chapels is preceded by a tall, vaulted vestibule, concluded in 1509 during the Manueline campaign. A passage to the church's interior was planned, but would never be implemented. This pantheon constitutes a compendium of the most exceptional architecture produced in Portugal during its time. An example of that are the vaults of some of the radial chapels. One of those was intended to receive the remains of King John II and his wife, Eleanor of Viseu, being identified by the royal coat of arms and by the symbols of these monarchs, the king's pelican ripping his chest and the queen's shrimp net. The Manueline portal, created by Mateus Fernandes, immediately impresses due to its dimensions, 49 feet high and 25 feet wide. Its manifold archivolts in ogee arches are exuberantly decorated with phytomorphic elements such as leaves, trunks and stalks, indicating perhaps an influence of Mudéjar art. In this portal, namely in its first 4 archivolts, we can also find written words that represent the motto of King Edward, Leote Faré, Taia Serré. In the construction campaign during the reign of Manuel I, it was also included, over the arches of the chapels, a decorative frieze formed by 2 parallel frames with the king's coat of arms on each angle. In the ascending frames for the large windows that would exist on the second floor of this pantheon, we can find, amidst the decorative elements, the initials M and R, Manuel Rei, Manuel King. The vault that would cover these chapels was never initiated, thus remaining for more than 500 years an uncovered space with the sky as a ceiling. Among the drawings that the Irish architect James Kavanagh Murphy produced when he visited Batalha, we can find his design proposal for a possible completion of this pantheon. In the end, the unfinished chapels stand as a challenge to the imagination of those who visit them, being an intrinsic part of a powerful monument to human ambition called Batalha Monastery. Thank you for discovering Portugal with us. If you liked the video, please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel to follow our new releases.